It's a real pleasure, and I'm going to drag this out a little bit, Dr. Smith, since we want to have our students come here. I'm going to go upstairs with Nathan to get the elevator upstairs. But Dr. Smith really does not need an introduction. He's been described as the Dean of Meat Science. He's been described as the father of invention for meat science. He has had a distinguished career at both Texas A&M, and I did have to make a comment about his slide. If you notice, he has Texas A&M listed there first, and you need to know your environment. And Colorado State is, it's not in alphabetical order. It's not in level of importance. The only thing we came up with is a geometric perfection because it's larger at the bottom than it is at the top. So, but we're delighted to have Dr. Smith finished his career here at Colorado State University after being at Texas A&M and at Washington State. Finished his career here as our first chair for the university. The Monford Chair was the first chair created at the university. He served in that through 2009 or 10. 10. And served that very well and was recognized as the meat scientist across the country that Monford at that time and later on other meat companies asked to solve problems. So he has been an educator of many, both in the classroom and out of the classroom, and we're delighted to share him with Texas A&M. Both of us did not want to let him go, so we both anteed up to get a piece of him, and we have him on both of our campuses. So we're delighted to have Dr. Smith here. We wanted to have him kick off, as he did last year, kick off our Livestock Forum by talking a little bit about where we're going. So I'm going to turn it over to him. If you drag it a little bit so our students can make it back in, that would be great, and then we'll let you get at it full speed. Okay. Delighted to have you here.
You want me to wait to start?
Just a little bit.
Okay.
You can tell jokes. An Aggie joke. Yeah.
An Aggie joke?
Tell them about the football program.
You want to tell them an Aggie joke?
No. We have a 12th man.
Well, I will wait until the students get back. Anybody have any question they want to ask me? Well, I can tell you that I grew up in the state of Oklahoma, graduated from high school, moved to California, got a job in a tomato packing shed in Cutler. Didn't think I was going to college, didn't have any money. But as I worked through that summer, first at that packing company and then later at United Fruit, I kept running into these young people that were talking about COS. So I finally got up the nerve to ask, and it turned out that it was College of the Sequoias, a junior college in Visalia, California. They had an agriculture department. I went out and visited with Bruce Jensen, who was in charge of the school farm, told him that I had grown up on a farm and I needed to work if I was going to go to college. Was there any possibility that he could give me a job? And he did. I then went over to the student union and got a job serving food and being a janitor and doing those sorts of things and made it. I was able to continue to work for 2 years at COS, and then I transferred up to Fresno State and went there. I originally was going to be an ag teacher. And in those days, there were 4 colleges in California that you could go to and get a degree in general agriculture, agriculture education. And then we all went to Davis, University of California at Davis, for what was called a cadet year. And I got to tell you that my first half of the cadet year was being a substitute teacher at Sanger, California. And I have never in my entire life came across as rowdy a group of young people. For one example, I was asked to teach welding. And this was a guy whose teacher, when I did my first weld, told me that I have taught welding for 40 years. And you come the closest to making a weld look like a turkey passed by here than any other student that I've ever had, because it was just clumps of stuff. At any rate, I went back, talked to my advisor, and he suggested that perhaps I would be a better teacher if I went to a junior college. And I said, well, what do you got to do to teach at a junior college? He said, well, you need to go get a master's in whatever it is that you would like to teach. And then I know they'd hire you in the California system, because they did have a wonderful program all over that state. So to make a long story short, I went to Washington State University, worked with a then very, very famous animal scientist named Gene Insminger. About halfway through my master's program, I'd been hired to be the relief herdsman. So when the person who ran the university dairy went on vacation, I replaced him in the beef cattle operation and so on. And I was out in a sheep pasture, and his administrative assistant drives up in a car. And he said, Dr. Insminger needs to see you immediately. And I thought, oh boy, end of my career, I've really messed something up, fixing to get fired, got to find out what else I can do. Well, I got up to his office, and he said, the person who taught meat science has just taken a job at the University of Wisconsin. And so we got to have somebody teach the meat courses. I said, well, when does the first one start? He said, 2 weeks. And I said, I don't think I can teach meats. He said, did you have a meats course? I said, yeah. He said, did you like it? I said, no. He said, oh, you'll love it. All the natural props. You have live animals and carcasses, and you cure stuff. And so I did. I actually fell in love with meat science. I taught as an instructor there for 5 years. Then went to Texas A&M, got my PhD. Went back to Washington State, 68, 69. It was a very snowy period of time in Pullman, Washington. My wife needed to get out of the garage and go buy groceries, so I had spent most all of the day snow shoveling a track out so that she could go to the grocery store. And she comes, sticks her head out of the window of that second-story house, and she said, Dr. Butler from Texas A&M wants to talk to you. And so I got down there. I don't even need this, I think, right?
Let's get you on.
I think I'm on.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Dr. Butler said, how are you? I said, fine. He said, how'd you like to come back to Texas? I said, what's the temperature there? He said, what? What's the temperature there? He said, oh, hell, I don't know, probably 70. I said, I'll come. He said, you don't know, you don't want to know what the job is? I said, I don't care. I don't care, I'll come. So I came back to Texas A&M, spent a wonderful 22 years, except for the last 8, because the last 8 I was at Texas A&M, I was the department head. And I'm sorry, Dr. Pond, but that is an absolutely worthless position in which you don't really get to do anything you like to do and have to do all the things that you don't. So this time I got a call from Kenneth Monfort. And Ken was so good to me over the years that I was doing research at Texas A&M. The feedlots in Texas, most of the people who run those feedlots buy feeder cattle and fill them with cattle that they own. But in this case, Mr. Monfort owned them all. And so if I needed to do some kind of a research project, he would always let us come up. And I would go into his office and I would say, Ken, I have this idea and I've got the money to do some of this at least. I want to do this, this, this. And he'd always say, that's absolutely the worst idea I've ever heard. But go ahead and do it and I'll give you the meat. And so we made several trips to Colorado to get lamb and beef and really hook those into projects that we were doing. So after 22 years, I got a call from Ken Monfort, and thanks to Dave Ames, I got to come back here and be the first Monfort chair. It's been a wonderful 20 years here. My wife became ill, and so I became her primary caregiver. When she passed away, Dr. Pond offered me a part-time position here, and Dr. Russell Cross did the same at Texas A&M. So I now live there. I teach a course there. We're trying to figure out a way that we can do that course here also. It's called Current Issues in the Meat Industry. I love the course. It's a lot of fun. A lot of the things you're going to see as I give this talk, ideas for those things really came from that. So is everybody back? Okay, we're on. I was asked to talk to you, and I'll go as fast as I can because I got a lot of slides. But I want to talk to you about how producers of our products make the decisions that take them from producing a commodity product, for example, beef, to a differentiated product like natural beef, organic beef, grass-fed beef, and so on. One of the things that you all know is that we've had lots of interest, lots of concern on the part of people here in the United States and across the world about where their beef comes from, where their pork comes from, who produced it, by whom were the animals that produced it, reared, raised, bred, fed, and so on. So there's concern about those kinds of things. The real tipping point into thinking in terms of differentiated products as opposed to commodity products really occurred in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And this really illustrates the kinds of things that consumers want. And I'm going to use beef for a lot of the examples because most of the work that I did during my career was with beef. But in 1984, the things that we thought affected the purchase of beef at that level were things like taste and price and convenience and value. And this is a wonderful slide that I developed after hearing John Lundeen, who used to work for Dr. Reagan at National Cattlemen's. And he gave this talk, and it said, all of a sudden now, 2010, we've had the second real change in what we're doing, and that is social causes, the environment, and sustainability and animal welfare are now important. But you know what's wrong with this slide? People look at it and they say, oh my gosh, if I'm going to be able to sell beef, I've got to have all these things, all of it. It has to taste right. It has to be the most convenient kind of product. We have to have social responsibility in terms of the environment, sustainability, and animal welfare. And that's not right. So I want to talk to you about misinterpreting what slides like this say. They're not saying all consumers of beef care about animal welfare. They're saying some consumers. So what we're concerned about is, would they buy it if it wasn't that? Would they buy it if it wasn't up to their standard? And the truth of the matter is, yes. So you really mislead people by showing them a slide like this. Because what it ought to say is, some consumers think that. Dr. Glenn Dolezal told me about 10 years ago, I said, of all the beef that Cargill produces, how many of those kinds of items are considered by the majority? He said, 1. 70% of the people that Cargill sells beef to are concerned only with, is it beef and is it the right price? So you're talking about that other 30% that might want convenience. You're talking about things that some want, but not all. So don't get misled when you see evidence like this presented that indicates that everybody's got to have that or they won't eat your product. Okay, for example, this study was done using a technique in which they don't ask you which things you think are important for the safety of the product. They give you a list of the things. And because the worst sounding word on there is pesticides, it wins the contest. Right? If you just went out and said, give me a list of these things, how many do you think? Have you ever known anyone in your entire life that said, I don't eat beef because it has pesticides? So you got to really be careful about this. Look at some of this stuff that shows up at the bottom. Who on earth would have said fed a scientific diet? So be very, very careful as you look at these sorts of things, because you could become misled if you're trying to use this as a guideline for what you're going to do. Here's another one. This is a study done by two different groups, Maidan and Shugal Research. And I had a daughter, my fourth daughter, Crystal Tyler, was wearing her PhD at Arizona State University. And because she was going to be a social scientist, one year at Christmas when she came back from Tempe and spent Christmas, we started talking about people that do these kinds of studies. Because that's all they can do in social science. You can't do experiments with people. So you have to ask them all these questions. She said, Daddy, you tell me what you want me to find, and I'll find it. Because I'll create a circumstance in which the questions that I ask will lead directly to whatever it is that you want this to say. Now here's something that's a good one. If someone walks up to me in a store and says, would you pay 5 cents more for X? How many of you are going to say 5 cents? No. Huh? You're just a grouchy old person if you say that. You say, yeah. Well, what about 20%? Well, then you don't want them to think you're poor. Sure. Yeah. Right? You got to be real careful. 84% of people said they'd pay 5% more. 55, half of the people said they'd pay 20%. You just can't believe that to start with. Now, some of these studies are done correctly, and the ones that are done correctly will tell you what the question they ask. And I'll show you some examples in a moment that will help you as you go through that. Let's say that the most important thing that you think you have to accommodate to sell beef is price. Well, you wouldn't sell prime. No, you decide instead of price, I'm going to sell taste. Prime. So, if you are an activist and you're tired of trying to make Costco and Target and Kroger and Safeway have cage-free hens, and not just have a few cage-free hens so they can have cage-free eggs, but you've decided that the only car that's really good is a Maserati. So I'm going to get a group of my friends, and we're just going to be activists, and we're going to say, if you want to sell cars, you can, but they all got to be Maserati, right? That's what activists do. You've got to do what I say is right, not have the choice of going to a used car lot and being able to find one of any kind, any price that will fit what you actually can buy. Now, if you're interested in taste, you would agree this is the best thing we produce, right? Well, there is one that's better. So let's go whole hog or lean. Here's one, and I'll skip over. They use Blonde Aquitaine cattle in France. They age the meat for 28 to 56 days. They then prepare it as a roast, and they put it in a chamber, and they hold it for 15 years, blowing air across it at minus 43 degrees centigrade with the wind going 100 miles an hour for 15 years. And then they sell it. And they sell it, let me go back. They'll sell you a rib steak, treated that way for only $3,200. Now, they don't have a whole bunch of people that can pay that. So they have a $2 million abattoir built on their ranch in France, and they kill 4 cattle a week. They will sell you a meal that's got some slices of it for $700. So, if I decide that that's the best tasting beef in the world because it has gone through what they call hibernation, the 15 years, isn't this stupid? That's hibernation. They'll sell it to you for $700, a couple of slices, not a whole rib steak. This is a wonderful list of things that was put together by Meeting Place. Rita Jane Gabbett is one of the best writers of our industry that I know. And she identified 10 things that we need to be concerned about because they're issues that are currently important to consumers. And they're local, natural, organic, grass-fed, antibiotic-free, raised without outdoor access, raised with sufficient space per animal, humanely slaughtered, hormone-free, and sustainable. So you got to do all those things? Some of those things? A few of those things? Well, in the end, I'll tell you how I think we go about figuring out what we do. Here's a wonderful example of seeing a result. Somebody did a poll, and they determined, for Consumer Reports, that 82% of consumers, said they would buy meat raised without antibiotics if it were available when they shopped. They said that in 2012. And yet, if you look at the records, 2 years later, we were selling 5%. What happened to the other 70-something%? Be very, very careful about looking at a number like that and deciding, okay, everybody wants antibiotic-free, right? Everybody wants it that way. We got to do it. And what they're including, the only way they can even get to 5% is they have organic, never ever 3, grass-fed are all also included in that 5%. So be very, very careful about what you think they say. Why is there a disconnect between what polls say people will do and what people do? Well, we're going to talk about that. Seems like there's 5 or 6% that want to do something, and they give you a number like 40 to 80. There are 3 reasons that happens. 1, pollsters intend to inflate the results. Not always, but sometimes. They intend to inflate. Second, police don't always tell the truth. And third, reporters have to have news. And so they listen too much and too often to the people who speak with the loudest voice, and that includes the vocal minority, food elitists, vegetarians, and incessant bloggers. So we're going to talk about each of those 3 things. Why is it that somebody says 80% of people want something, and yet when we present it, we can't sell it because they can't pay for it or they don't really want it? So let's look at this. Here's a wonderful example. Consumers Union, for a Consumer Reports study, actually did consumer intercepts, and they walked up to consumers. And this will tell you what my daughter told me about I can get you any kind of number. The way the question should have been asked was, how concerned are you about use, not overuse? Once you say overuse, you've already got a hook. Well, they didn't even ask it that way. What they did is they said, how concerned are you about overuse of antibiotics in animal feed on farms raising animals in crowded conditions? So if you want a good result, if you want to inflate the result, do that. Or if you want the number to be bigger, say, how concerned are you about the overuse of antibiotics in animal products, including the potential to create superbugs? See how you can get those kinds of answers? Sometimes people doing the polling intend to inflate the results. The second thing is when you ask people things, the pollees, not police, police, don't always tell you the truth. This is a wonderful one. It says, passengers on Southwest Airlines, every time you fly now, a couple of days later, you get something on your email that says, would you please fill this out and tell us how much you enjoyed your trip last week from Houston to here? And what this says is Southwest passengers continuously brag about the quality of the food they are served on those planes. Southwest Airlines has never served food on planes. So what's happening? Wonderful study was done, actually in the medical community, about self-reported data. And they have decided now that they can't say, well, how many times did you eat sausage in 1941? Because they say the fallibility of memory and the fact that we tend to exaggerate the good things and diminish or underreport our bad behavior. So you can't really use that kind of data to determine what people actually do. I also think that they can get you into situations where you will tend to exaggerate what you did or would do, partially because of embarrassment. An example that my daughter gave me was, if you pointed to a girl and said, do you think she is pretty? You'd get one answer. If you said, don't you think my daughter is pretty? You'd get another answer. And you would be, even if you didn't think the daughter was pretty, you'd be embarrassed, wouldn't you? To say, no, really, not really. No, I really don't. So, when these people say 37% would be willing to pay $1 per pound more for antibiotic meat, Mark Gustafson, is that real? Can't possibly be. Mark spent his life with USMEF and JBS selling meat. So you really have to watch these kinds of things, that you're not getting answers that really are not there. This is a wonderful one. Foster Farms Chicken Company in central San Joaquin Valley of California wanted a study done, and they were quite aware of what you can do with polling. And so they actually went backward through this, and they said 59% of the people that they polled felt scrutinized over being asked these questions. And secondly, they were under such peer pressure, they claimed that they ate organic food 29% of the time and had never eaten it. So sometimes you get answers that are not really based on the truth. Lots of things that we're looking at now has to do with marketing to millennials. And you see all sorts of things written about that. There are a few things that we know for sure about them. Two of them are listed on this slide. One is they get most of their information from the social media, and they prefer texting as opposed to emails. There are others who really get quite harsh about what millennials do. And in a report by Ashley Lultz, who actually writes for a finance and business company, she was telling the story about listening to millennials to decide what you're going to serve in your stores. And she says McDonald's listened to them, and Pizza Hut listened to them, and Olive Garden listened to them, and they changed their menus, and they sank further. And she said, I'm not saying, she said, why did they make that mistake? Because millennials are lying about their food habits. I don't like lying, but they're not telling the truth about what they want. And she says what they want are affordability and convenience. The last thing on there is reporters, because they have to have news, tend to follow too often what the vocal minority, the activists, the vegetarians, and so on are saying. This is a wonderful list that was first put together by Dan Murphy in Meeting Place. If you just go through this is just time, chronologically. What have they attacked us for? They attacked us for health and nutrition, then food safety, then animal welfare, then factory farming, then environmental concerns, and the latest one is how much water it takes. So they're never going to be satisfied. The issues are never going to go away because you appease the activists for this thing, and now they'll choose another. So Listen to the activists. If there's an opportunity in that for you to produce something that you can get paid for, or if you can sell through your company and get paid for, fine. But don't do all of it that way, because not all of the people are ever in agreement about what they will do. Those false claims will continue, and so we have to continue to be ready to answer them. This is an interesting slide, study done in 2013, and they asked people across the whole age spectrum, who do you trust about GMOs and pesticides and food safety? This is not going to surprise a single one of you. 39% Food and Mom blogs, 31% peers offline, 24% the government, 17% physicians. For all of you university professors in there, we didn't even make the list. Physicians. My oldest granddaughter is a physician. Graduated from the University of Oklahoma Medical School, now works at Duke University Hospital. And I visited with her. I used to drag her around. She listened to me give talks about beef and things. But I asked her when she got out of medical school, okay, honey, there are going to be people now that come and ask you what they should eat and what they should feed your children. I want to know whether you have the credentials now to help them. I said, how many courses did you take in human nutrition? How many do you think she took? 0. I said, how many lectures in medical school did you have on human nutrition? She said, well, the OU Medical School's in Oklahoma City, and of course she had gone to school at Norman, and that's where the university is. She said we had one 50-minute lecture. So physicians? No. You're going to take the advice of a physician in what you should eat as opposed to getting it from a registered dietitian, for example, or someone who spent their life studying diet, human health. Now, a good example of what can happen to you. There was a young man that was a graduate student when I taught at Texas A&M the first period of time, worked with Carl Vanderzant. His name was Carl Custer. Got his PhD, went to work for the USDA. And he was doing analyses of products that came in from the field. And a product came in called lean, finely textured beef. And he just went around all over everywhere. Well, guess what I worked on today? Pink slime. Pink slime. I grew up on a grade B dairy. And my dad and I would milk the cows, and my mother and sister were on the back porch, and we had a cream separator. How many of you seen a cream separator? Ames? Yeah, okay. So they would strain it, and they would use centrifugal force to separate the cream from the fluid milk. That's exactly what this is. You just put a whole bunch of stuff in there, and you have to make it real small. You have to comminute it, and then you use heat and centrifugal force, and because lean is heavier than fat, you sort the lean out, and it comes out in pellets, and that's what they were calling as LFTB. But he then said it often enough that somebody got Diane Sawyer on ABC News to make a program out of it. And with that came the problem that has cost that company, and is now in a lawsuit, $1.2 billion. $1.2 billion because somebody said there was something wrong with it. A part of our problem is we won't believe the science. I had gone through that plant. The McDonald's company asked me to go through that plant when it was first built in Dakota City, Nebraska. And I went through it, and I had never in my entire life seen anything like it in terms of sanitation. And so I wrote a letter to the McDonald's Corporation, and they started using it. There were 3 of us who did that for them, and they started using it in their products. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It was a wonderful recovery of something that would have gone to rendering otherwise, and yet this is what happens. Well, the reason is we tried to fight this with science, and yet we really couldn't get it done. If you look at the things that we've been accused of that we've done better on in time, they were the things that were easy for us to scientifically prove, and I'll give you some examples in a moment. But if you look at what that vocal minority of people, the vegetarians, the activists, and so on, they almost never mention scientists. They don't want to discuss science. They want to discuss some mystic kind of thing that can't be answered with science, because then they can win. So let's talk about science specifically. Centers for Disease Control wrote a wonderful report. Elizabeth Whalen covered it in American Council on Health and Science 2009. Basically, it says this: the chemistry and our methods for detection of chemicals is such that we can detect anything in anything at any level. But just because we can detect it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it, or that it will actually cause you to not live as long a life. So we got to be really, really careful about arithmetic. And if you look at most of the things that we have problems with, they are arithmetic problems. Puerile arithmetic. And I'll show you some examples of how we have used science in arithmetic. In about 1948, we started using implants in cattle because we could switch growth from fatness toward lean mass. So we got more protein, less fat. So we implanted by putting a steroid compound, usually it was estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, in their ear. And we took the amount of estrogen, for example, in one normal menstrual cycle of a female, put it in a little piece of sponge, put it in the back of their ear, and over a period of about 100 days, it leaked out, and it made them leaner, less fat, and they grew more rapidly because they were directing their energy consumed toward that. Well, people got concerned. And when you look at the chemistry, what am I doing wrong? What'd you fix, huh? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Here's the part of this they focused on. They said, okay, you use estrogen in there, and so how much more estrogen is there in a steak from an animal that had one of those things in its ear than one that didn't? And you know what they said? 50% more. 1.9 instead of 1.3 nanograms. Nanograms. Twice I filmed a little tape in Mile High Stadium for Darrell Wilkes of National Cattlemen's Beef Association, where I would walk out onto the football field and I would reach down and pick up a blade of grass, and I said, a nanogram. What is a nanogram? A nanogram is one blade of grass in all of the grass that it would take to cover 100 football fields. There's an arithmetic problem. If you think that's likely to cause you some sort of problem to have a little bit more hormone. But I also came across this wonderful study done by Hoffman and Evers, a couple of chemists in Germany, that looked at what a normal male or female produces endogenously. And so then I started giving talks where I would say, okay, a normal, non-pregnant female produces, if she doesn't eat anything, 480,000 a day. So we're going to have her eat a steak from an animal that had been implanted with estrogen, and today she will have 480,000, 1.9. If you think that's a problem, you have a problem with arithmetic, right? It just can't be done. Okay? Well, then the next one was when I was working with John Skanga here. John Skanga's wife is a PAC, a physician's assistant. And we were talking one night about birth control pills. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to develop a slide that says, okay, you young ladies who don't want to have a baby and you're on birth control pills, I got a deal for you. If you will eat 18,421 3-ounce portions of beef from an implanted steer, you'll get the same amount of estrogen as you get from a birth control pill. If you don't understand that, Dave Anderson, you have a math problem, right? They didn't teach you Wisconsin about math, right? Dave agrees with me. Okay. The next argument was always, and you cannot believe over my lifetime how many people have told me, I happen to have a 6'9" grandson. And I just got so damn tired of hearing about it that I started saying, oh yeah, we had him eat only beef from implanted steers. That was it. Yes, That's why he's so big. He has a great big daddy, is why he's so big. Grandpa, not so much. But I developed a slide that says, okay, if you think your children are actually reaching puberty earlier than they should, let's figure out how much of this they'd have to eat. We sometimes use in the implants testosterone if we're giving it to heifers. So they could get testosterone if they'd eat something from an animal that was given testosterone. And if you're a boy and you want to be a man, if you'll just eat 1.3 million steaks per day, not in your lifetime, per day, if you don't understand that, you have a problem with arithmetic, okay? And I think people have dropped these issues, primarily because not just me, but all kinds of people like me, Bo Reagan, gave these kinds of talks. If you do the estrogen thing with females, it's almost 48,000 per day. There's no possibility that we're causing people to reach puberty early because of the hormones that we gave to the cattle. This is a good one also, the dose makes the poison, and that goes all the way back to Hippocrates, and it's been credited to others. The dose makes the poison. They give a really good example in here. They said, if you would like to commit suicide, you can do it one of two ways. Drink 96 cups of coffee without stopping, or eat 3.8 tons of turkey. So you see the problem? If you don't understand that that won't work, you have an arithmetic problem, right? The coffee example is a really good one because the person that's in charge of the food safety program in Europe talked specifically about a single cup of coffee having more carcinogens than everything that is allowable in all other products that they eat for a year through agriculture. So the dose makes the poison. If you don't understand that, you need help with your math. These are the two studies that I've cited for at least 30 years. One was done by the National Academy of Sciences. The other was done by FDA. One of them says the average person in this room has a 1 out of 4 chance to develop cancer in their lifetime. So the odds that you will get cancer are 25.00%. Now, we're going to add on to that how much more danger you would have if, in fact, all of your food contained the maximum allowable residue level. Now your odds will change from 25.00 to 25.06. Still 1 out of 4. Then they did a study and said, okay, 1 out of 14 of us will die of cancer. So that's 7.7000. And they put in all of the things, pesticides, antibiotics, hormones, and drugs, and said if you did that every day for your entire life, that would change to 7.7001. If you don't understand that, you don't understand the math. This is a study that I had always used a total diet study, but I had difficulty in trying to sell this science to dietitians. And so I got Dr. Terry Engel to help me with this. And we chose 4 of the most normally occurring pesticides. And we decided, okay, based upon the total diet study, which is done every year by the FDA, how many beef loin steaks or McDonald's quarter pounders would you have to reach what is called the ADI, acceptable daily intake, which, by the way, has a 1,000-fold safety margin. So you actually would add to this. So for you to actually die from eating McDonald's quarter pounders because it had heptachlor in it, you'd need to eat 219,000 of them at one setting. You understand that? You get that? They teach math in China?
Yeah.
So you get it.
Good.
Your own. The other thing is we monitor the residues in food. And it's called the National Residue Monitoring Program. I'm using 2008 because the actual last one that we have is 2010. But it just simply says, okay, how often do they have violative chemical residues? And just look, antibiotics, everybody's concerned about antibiotics. 0, 0, 0, 0. We almost never find them. Find them sometimes in cold dairy cows, but not very often in steers and heifers. So, we also have looked We did 2 studies here in the 1990s. I will tell you that those 2 studies were funded by the Beef Checkoff Program, and what you're looking at up there, one study, Osborne, was done in Canada. The other 3 studies were done here, and it cost probably $1.5 million to develop that slide. That's the research that we did, testing for all those things. And we couldn't find a violative residue in anything, conventional, natural, or organic. We found residues, but none of them were violative. None of them were over what is considered acceptable by the government. The latest one, of course, is frankenfood. And now we have all these kinds of people who will not believe the science. They don't believe that they can eat cloned animals. But enough studies have been done that this is changing worldwide. This is a list of the groups. I was a member of the Food Safety Committee for FASS, which is all the animal science societies, for a number of years. We did a study and wrote a report about BT corn, no effect. The one that's really going to affect the world is one done by Yang, 2005, in China. And have you read? China has just announced that they will produce, as rapidly as possible, 100 million cloned cows to produce the beef that they need for their people. In addition, EFSA, which is the European Food Safety Group, and our own Food and Drug Administration all say it's safe. But so far, we can't convince the people who want to say anti-GMO. Ask them, what is GMO? I don't know what it is, but I don't want it. And I don't think anybody else should have it. And so I think you need to label everything so that we'll all know not to eat it. Science. My grandson, that's a basketball player, sent this to me because it was used in one of his classes at the University of North Dakota. And what it says is there really isn't any difference in the chemical composition or nutrient content of GMO crops in comparison to those that are conventional. And they were using this beet example to say we've studied the sugar and there is no difference. I took a daughter and a granddaughter to eat at Papa Do's last night in Denver. And while we were there, my daughter, who is a Texas A&M graduate, Dr. Reagan, I apologize, was explaining to her daughter that when she was growing up, bread would mold in about a week. But that now all of the bakeries added this secret compound that was called corn syrup solids that keeps it from molding. How many of you think that's right? Huh? No, it's sodium benzoate. So you have to really, really be careful about what somebody tells you in a blog or what somebody tells you in social media. This is a comparison of what scientists who are members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science believe on issues. And then in a similar poll, which was done by the Pew Research Group, and it says, are genetically modified foods safe to eat? 88% of scientists say absolutely yes, but we only have 37% of adults who agree. So basically, you can take any issue like that and look at it and say, what is it that we should do? And I really believe that we should, in fact, try to consider why people say what they do, why they doubt science. A lot of it is they just depend on their intuition, not just millennials, everybody, on their own beliefs. They really are most concerned about agreeing with what their peers think about things. Let's go back and talk again about science and how important it is. And I use the cause for science to say that I think we don't hear about hormones anymore, primarily because lots of people have been able to debunk that kinds of stuff. But even if there's still some 5 or 6 or 10 or 20% or even a majority, we've got to keep trying to get to the movable middle, that 70% in the middle, who really will listen to what we say or don't care in the first place. So we need the science to help them understand what it is that we're doing. And this just simply says, the majority of consumers exist in the movable middle. They have questions about modern farming and ranching and about harvesting animals, processing meat. But at the end of the day, what are they concerned about? Safe, healthy, affordable. General Mills just announced that it's going to take all the artificial flavors, artificial colors out of its product. And they've gotten Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, Panera, Kraft, Subway to agree with them. And when you ask them, why are you doing that? They say, because we don't want to have any barriers to people feeling comfortable about buying our foods. One of the groups that has done this is Kellogg. And Kellogg went along with Target saying they wanted small, local, natural, organic brands. They wanted it to be healthier. So I had the opportunity in November of this year to meet the Vice President of Food Safety for Kellogg, Dr. Theodora Morella Hines. And I asked her how much of Kellogg's decision was based on making it healthier, making it safer. She said, none. It's 100% marketing. So you have to be able to differentiate whether changes are made purely for marketing or because, in fact, they can do something. So I have wondered, why is it that when Kellogg decides that they need to remove some things or change something, why do they go whole hog or none? Why do they do all of it? Why do they label all of it differently? Why do they put the recipes together? Why don't they have things that they can present as an alternative and voluntarily label them so that people can find them? I love what Costco did. HSUS, the Humane Society of the United States, really got on their case because they were serving eggs other than those from cage-free hens. And Costco said, we're going to stand up for science and consumer choice, acknowledging that some people prefer cage-free, but others advocate that cages are safer for the hens. We at Costco present several options. So long as the option that you are concerned with is available, and that's the way I think we ought to fight animal rights. We ought to get everybody to say, yeah, we'll present some of it, not all of it, but we will in fact, because it's higher in price, and not everybody can afford the higher price. So why not use voluntary labeling as a marketing tool, and then make it mandatory that it be labeled in 3 cases. 1, to prevent food fraud. 1, to assure the integrity of the product. And 1, if in fact there is danger to private or public health. A good example was country of origin labeling. The government should not have made that mandatory because it should have been a marketing label, which would voluntarily be placed there by someone who wanted to gain advantage, getting a premium because they're said product of the United States of America. So we're near the end. And I'm saying that producers for the next decade now need to make decisions about all these things that they read about. Are they a fad? Are they a whim? Is it a trend that's likely to continue? They've got to make a decision. The people who produce them on farms and ranches and feed yards, and the people who manufacture the products like JBS that are sold to the public. They've got to make those kinds of decisions. Here's another good example of how you can get misled. I saw this report probably 3 weeks ago, and it was saying antibiotic-free sales in the United States grew 12.5% for pork, 28% for chicken, and 32% for beef last year. Sounds like we better produce some of that, right? Except when you look at those actual figures, they should have used percentage points, not percentages, because 50% of nothing still doesn't get it to a very high number, does it? There's an arithmetic problem here. What actually happened was we sold antibiotic-free pork largely as organic, but some as antibiotic-free. 3.6% of all the pork we sold last year. This year we sold 4%. So what they should have reported, instead of 12.5, 28, 32, they should have reported 0.4, 2.4, and 0.8. So, with all of that argument, in 2008, I gave a talk, and I got all the information together that I could find on if you looked at all the steer and heifer beef that had produced and sold in the year 2004 to 7 was the range. This is what we were doing. 91% conventional, 8% natural, 4% never ever 3, 1/10, 1/10, 1/10 for non-hormone treated cattle beef. That's stuff we can sell to the European Union, grass-fed and organic. Now, I'm going to ask the 20 guests, how much do you think conventional has decreased? Because I know exactly what the figure is. Randy Block had one of his people spend 3 weeks to get me the data that I'm going to show you in a second. You think grass-fed's going crazy, increasing? How many of you think that? You do. You'd think that because you're from Australia, specifically Sydney. Sydney, Australia, okay? Dr. Ames, what do you think? Which are going up and which are going down? It's been 10 years. You don't think there's a lot of difference? You agree? So somebody comes and tells you, you've got to produce natural beef if you're going to sell any. Do you? Grass-fed's going to take over. Not if you've eaten much of it. Right? So I'm telling you, had we listened to the people that gave us the results of polls, that either they misinterpreted as they presented it to us, or we misinterpreted. Just think, every time you see a list like that, some of them, all of them, 100% of them, they won't buy it unless I do that. They will buy it if I do. They won't if I don't. Be very, very careful. So here's my recommendation, and I've given this in front of some Packer audiences before, and they say, this is nothing new to us. This is the way we've always done it. I don't think that we should ever change all of anything based on anything. What I really think we need to do is we need to produce some of every kind of product that we think will have a market. Some. And then we let the marketplace ration the supply. They're going through a real soul-searching process in the pork industry. And part of the reason is, in order to make antibiotic-free pork, you can do it, but at a cost. And the cost is then exaggerated because of the total carcass, only 44% of it can gain any kind of competitive advantage in marketing. So you have to carefully go through those kinds of decisions. So I'm in favor of labeling anything, organic, grass-fed, polka dot, striped, whatever. If somebody wants it yellow, we'll produce some yellow. And then we'll track it and trend it and try to determine if there's enough of it. And if there's enough of people that want it, we'll produce some more of it. This is a milk company. Milk, cow's milk. Used to just be cow's milk, you know? You know how many different kinds of milk this company sells? 52. 52. So maybe we need 52 kinds of beef, but we'll never know which one. So we may have to produce all 52 to produce exactly what it is that consumers want. Maybe we even want it great big. Thank you very much.